Tonight, the war between the United States and Iran is nearing the 2-week mark, with no sign of slowing down. American forces have now carried out 13 straight nights of strikes on Iranian targets, and the White House says a far bigger military option is on the table. Meanwhile, President Trump says Tehran isn't ready to make a deal, even as his own officials hold quiet talks behind the scenes. Our correspondent starts us off from Washington. Correspondent, Washington. Tonight, this conflict is now in its 14th day, and the pace hasn't let up. Overnight, the U.S. military launched fresh strikes on Iranian command centers and drone facilities, while Iranian-backed drones struck a border crossing near a U.S.-linked base in northern Iraq. It's part of a wider pattern of tit-for-tat attacks that have spread far beyond Iran's borders, from Jordan to Bahrain to the shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump met today with his top national security advisors and cabinet officials to weigh whether to escalate the fight even further. Sources say the president is considering what one official described as a massive strike option, a campaign that could go well beyond the scope of the operation that opened this war back in February. Speaking to reporters, the president struck a cautious but firm tone, saying he believes Iran wants an agreement, but that the timing simply isn't there yet. At the same time, the president says the two sides remain in contact and that he believes Tehran is, in his words, getting more serious about negotiating. But for now, the bombing campaign continues. On the economic front, oil markets are feeling the strain. Brent crude climbed above $100 a barrel this week for the first time in months, driven by fears over shipping disruptions through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military says it intercepted and disabled a tanker attempting to slip past its blockade on Iranian ports, while Saudi Arabia carried out new strikes against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen after the group targeted another vessel in the Red Sea. Here in Washington, the war is also becoming a political flashpoint. The House of Representatives this week passed a measure aimed at limiting the president's war powers in Iran without congressional approval, a rare, bipartisan rebuke. A similar effort stalled in the Senate. The White House has dismissed the votes as symbolic, insisting the administration has the authority it needs to continue operations. Anchor, and there are new developments tied to Israel as well. What can you tell us about Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit? Correspondent, Washington. That's right. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected back in Washington early next week for what will be his 7th visit to meet with President Trump since the war began. The two leaders are set to sit down at the White House on Tuesday to discuss the state of the conflict and next steps. Israel has largely stayed out of the direct fighting in recent weeks, but officials there say the military remains ready to respond immediately if Iran strikes Israeli territory again. Separately, Israel's Mossad intelligence agency revealed new details this week about an alleged Iranian plot to target senior Israeli officials by recruiting operatives from abroad, the latest sign of the shadow war running alongside the open one. Anchor. What about the human and diplomatic toll? We've heard casualty figures rising on both sides. Correspondent, Washington. It's significant. Iranian health officials say dozens of people have been killed inside Iran since the ceasefire collapsed earlier this month, with hundreds more wounded, including women and children. On the American side, service members have lost their lives in Iranian retaliatory strikes on U.S. bases in the region, and the Pentagon has held solemn ceremonies to honor the fallen. Diplomatically, the picture is just as tense. Iran's military has warned that any U.S. interference in the Strait of Hormuz will be met with what it calls a decisive and swift response. And this week, Tehran even threatened to treat a British airbase as a legitimate target accusing the US of launching long-range bomber missions from British soil, a claim American officials have not confirmed. The United Nations Secretary-General says the situation in the Middle East is, in his words, getting out of control and is renewing calls for both sides to return to the negotiating table. And finally, any signs at all of a path toward de-escalation